It's a funny coincidence that I decided to watch through Takeshi Kitano's Outrage trilogy for the first time recently, then a spiritual successor released out of nowhere as an Amazon original shortly after. I knew it couldn't possibly be tied with the trilogy from a narrative perspective for obvious reasons, but even calling it a spiritual successor seems like a bit of a misnomer, when in actuality it's more of a standalone commentary on Kitano's rumination of his career up until this point. Going into it, I was aware that it would be more of a comedy than his recent output, and this is even more evident when he's credited as his stage name Beat Takeshi in the opening crawl, but nothing could have prepared me for how avant-garde it turned out to be. The film is actually broken up into 3 different parts, hence the name, and plays out like a Groundhog Day of the same scenario, sharing some of the same scenes but with tones totally set apart from each other. It's an obvious deconstruction of Kitano's career of being both a well-known comedian and crime noir writer and director. It's a fun, introspective piece even in the places it decides to play it totally straight. I got the feeling that Kitano started writing out a great script for a new crime noir, but it was ultimately truncated by stifled creativity, so an idea for a short film being lampooned and shown in its various styles started to emerge. As its own self-contained bubble, the first part is Meritorious, with great cinematography and pacing alike. The camera work isn't anywhere near as elaborate or kinetic as his other stuff, but its static composition accentuates the elegance of its smaller scale and simplicity. It really has a nice look to it all. It follows the misadventures of a hitman, codenamed Mouse, that repeatedly goes to this local cafe to retrieve parcels from a client only known as Mr. M. I don't know if Kitano had already struck a deal with Amazon at this point making this thing, but if so, it totally feels like a wink to the audience with how Mr. M sounds when said in Japanese. And also the fact that a lot of this movie is just Mouse opening packages. After completing several jobs, he is then apprehended by the police, and wait a minute, is that Ichi the Killer in Kakihara? I guess it's not too surprising, as those actors have been in his films before, along with a lot of recurring actors and comedians he's closely associated with. The film actually reminds me a lot of Jim Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die, which was an experimental film for that director that leaned into its absurdism and meta commentary for its justification, along with an ensemble of A-list actors he's worked with throughout his filmography. During an interrogation, Mouse strikes a deal with the detectives to go undercover to take down a local crime syndicate drug ring in exchange for his freedom. This certainly lends an ironic meaning to Mouse's name since he's become a rat. The rest of the film unfolds with tropes you'd come to expect from a Kitano feature, but it's not until the second part of the film, called the spin-off, that it takes those tropes and decides to flip them on their head. It takes a more lighthearted approach, acting more like an incidental comedy involving slapstick humor. Think of if Mr. Bean became a hitman. It follows the same story of course, but Mouse is a lot more sloppy in his execution, perhaps showcasing the comedic tellings of a hitman who's lost his touch due to old age. It has its moments of absurdism, sure, but it's not until the third part of the film that things start getting really silly. I can only describe the remaining runtime as a scattered-brained collection of outtakes I think Kitano thought were too funny not to show. And this eccentric idea helps these scenes not go to waste, as well as pad out the runtime. Everyone in this cut is an absolute riot to watch, and you can really tell everyone on set was having a lot of fun basking in the shenanigans. I especially enjoyed this one gag in the third part's rendition of the interrogation scene, where actor Tadanobu Asano tries to get answers out of Mouse by performing sadistic acts as an obvious nod to his masochistic character Kakihara from Ichi the Killer. Because there's a million jokes a minute, some of the humor fell flat for me. Like, there's these authorial interjections made to look like reactions from a live chat poking fun at the inconsistencies of the story and length of the film. But I guess it's a necessary evil to have such an obvious joke since the internet has become so commonplace. I personally would have found it more fitting if Broken Rage was released on April Fool's Day, since it's kind of a stretch to call this thing a full-fledged film. But if touted as an April Fool's joke, it could possibly undermine its validity as an experimental retrospective and possible turning point for Kitano's style moving forward. Even if you aren't familiar with Takeshi Kitano, it's interesting enough on its own that it's only heightened by being acquainted with his works. It's not a big time investment and the actors are charismatic and play off each other well. It's on the shorter side like the Like a Dragon prologue film I've recommended before, and is tangentially related, so it seemed like a perfect fit for my recommendation series for the channel. I'm excited to see what Kitano or Beat Takeshi has in store for us next, because if it's anything like Broken Rage, I'll make more of an effort to be there day one.